This video is intended for applicants with more than $20,000 of liquid assets. The following slides will share in detail about Bend-Redmond Habitat's policy surrounding assets as it relates to closing costs and down payment contributions. The following information gets a little complicated, so after watching the video once or twice, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any of your questions or to have us calculate your specific situation. Because this video contains some updates, you will hear two different voices giving you the following information.
The first question we need to ask ourselves, what are liquid assets? A liquid asset is an asset that can easily be converted into cash, such as heavily traded shares, money market instruments, and funds held in checkings accounts. So this might look like a savings. Maybe you received a big inheritance and you have that now in an account. It could be cash you have in a checkings account, or maybe stocks. Liquid assets are not vehicles, land or real estate, a 401k or an IRA. So we will not use those types of assets in our calculations. Bend-Redmond Habitat for Humanity looks at your monthly gross income to calculate your area median income percentage. That means if based on your income information, you are below 80% of the area median income, regardless of your liquid assets, you still may qualify for the program. You will not qualify, however, for the Dream Savers Match Savings Account, which we typically utilize in partnership with Neighbor Impact to reduce the cost of your closing costs. In this case, Habitat requires that you might cover some of your closing costs and possibly a down payment. Let's move on to see how that works. When calculating your assets, we look at a few things. First, we'll look at your monthly gross income to calculate your affordable home mortgage payment based on 33% of your gross income. Next, we'll look at the amount of 6 months of emergency savings based on that home mortgage payment. After that, we'll review the total amount of liquid assets that you have, and then go over closing costs. Typically, a candidate will not be paying more than $8,000 worth of closing costs. After that, we'll review your pre-qualified loan amount and compare that with Habitat's annual average loan amount, which we set every year. After that, we'll review if you're qualified to contribute a down payment.
This slide specifically addresses Bend-Redmond Habitat's asset policy for applicants with $20,000 or more of liquid assets. We will address each of the bullet points in more detail and in examples in the coming slides. First, your liquid assets will be applied to closing costs with a limit of $8,000. We review this amount annually, so it could change. After that, and based on calculations we will show you, we will determine if an additional down payment contribution is required. This amount will not be more than the difference between Habitat's pre-approved annual pre-qualified loan amount and your personal pre-qualified loan amount at the time of your application. We will also ensure that you have a minimum of 6 months of emergency funds left over in liquid assets before calculating a down payment contribution.
In order to understand these calculations a little bit better in practice, we're going to review 3 examples. Example 1, we're going to introduce you to Carlos. So let's say Carlos's monthly gross household income is $4,000. If we multiply that $4,000 by 33%, we will establish that his estimated mortgage payment is about $1,320 every month. If we take that $1,320 and multiply it by 6 for 6 months of emergency savings, we get $7,920. This is the amount we will reserve for his emergency fund. If Carlos has $25,000 between his checkings and savings account, that is the number and amount of liquid assets that he has. We'll take that $25,000 and subtract $8,000, which are his closing costs, which leaves him with about $17,000 of liquid assets remaining. Continuing on in our example with Carlos, we're going to look a little closer at some other numbers, such as his pre-qualified loan amount, to find out if he will contribute a down payment. So if we remember, Carlos has a monthly household gross income of $4,000. Based on this number, he was pre-qualified for a home loan of $225,000. Habitat has an annual average loan amount for applicants that is $220,000 for the given year. Because Carlos qualifies for a loan above the goal amount, he is not required to contribute a down payment based on our policies. So he will only be required to pay $8,000 of closing costs, which is the maximum amount of closing costs. He'll still have $17,000 in liquid assets. Let's continue to example 2 and meet Kay and John. Let's say Kay and John's monthly gross household income is $3,200. If we multiply $3,200 by 33%, we get $1,056, which will be their monthly mortgage payment. If we multiply $1,056 by 6, we will receive 6 months of reserved emergency fund savings, which is $6,336. If Kay and John have $25,000 in savings minus $8,000 of closing costs, that will leave them with $17,000 in liquid assets. So very similar to Carlos' situation, at this point they have $17,000 in liquid assets. We'll move on to the next slide to see what happens. We'll continue our example by looking at Kay and John's pre-qualified loan amount. If we remember, their monthly household gross income is $3,200 a month. So they were pre-qualified for a home loan of $175,000. Habitat's annual average loan, we remember, is $220,000. So the difference between the annual average loan amount of $220,000 and their pre-qualified home loan of $175,000 is $45,000. We'll get back to this number in a second. First, we'll look at the equation we'll use to calculate a down payment. We'll take the remaining liquid assets after the closing costs. For Kay and John, that was $17,000. And we'll subtract that by the average loan difference, which in this equation is $45,000. That will give us an amount. If this amount is positive, we will then go on to subtract 6 months of emergency funds, and the remaining amount will be the down payment requirement. But if this amount is negative, Kay and John will not be required to contribute a down payment, only the $8,000 of closing costs. So using some of the numbers we've already calculated, we have the average loan difference of $45,000. And we see Kay and John's remaining liquid assets at $17,000 after they paid the closing costs. So if we take the equation of our remaining liquid assets, $17,000, subtract the average loan difference, which is $45,000, that leaves us with negative $28,000. So because that number is negative, that would leave Kay and John with no emergency 6 months reserve. So they will not be required to contribute a down payment, only closing costs. For our final example, we'll meet Vanessa. Vanessa's monthly gross household income is $3,750. If we take $3,750 and multiply that by 33%, we will get her monthly mortgage payment, $1,237. If we take that number and multiply it by 6 for the amount left aside for her emergency fund, we get $7,422. Remember, Vanessa will always have this amount minimum in her emergency fund left over from her liquid assets. Vanessa has $50,000 in savings. So if we take $50,000 and subtract $8,000, which is our closing cost cap, that would leave her with $42,000 left in liquid assets. So will Vanessa contribute a down payment? We'll continue our example by looking at Vanessa's pre-qualified loan amount. Remember, her monthly household gross income is $3,750. She was pre-qualified for a home loan of $210,000. Habitat's annual average loan amount is $220,000. The difference between these two numbers is $10,000. So we'll use our equation of remaining liquid assets, which we calculated on the previous slide, minus the average loan difference, which we just calculated here, equals this amount. Remember, if this amount is positive, we'll continue with the final equation. The final equation, x minus her emergency fund, the amount that needs to remain in her account, equals her down payment contribution. Let's continue with our final calculations to see what Vanessa will contribute as a down payment. Her remaining liquid assets are $42,000. Her average loan difference was $10,000. If we subtract these two numbers, we get $32,000. Because this number is positive, we can continue with the final equation. This number, minus her emergency fund, will equal her down payment contribution. $32,000 minus $7,422, her emergency fund, equals $24,578. Now, this number would typically be her down payment contribution, but one more piece in our policy states that the maximum contribution cannot exceed the average loan difference. So if we look back up, our average loan difference was $10,000, the difference between her pre-qualified loan amount and Habitat's annual loan amount. So Vanessa's contribution to a down payment will be $10,000. One thing to keep in mind, and something we will review often with our homeowners, is our shared equity agreement, which states that if you were to sell your Habitat home, Habitat then has the right of first offer, so we can place the first offer on buying the home back. If we did so, you would get your down payment back in addition to the principal house-only payments that you made in the first 12 years. After the 12-year mark, you start earning an additional percentage of the shared equity in the home that you'd also receive in addition to getting back your down payment. For more information regarding shared equity model and this policy, please email our homeowner services team at homeownerservices@brhabitat.org. Another important piece to remember is that despite the appraised value of your sustainable and efficient Habitat home, you are only paying 33% of your gross household income. That's Habitat's commitment to an affordable housing payment for you. Now, if you want us to calculate your specific asset example, send us an email at homeownership@brhabitat.org. And if you're filling out a customer intake form or an application, remember to use the code BRHFH5678 to confirm you've watched this video.